She gathered her papers, her receipts, her evidence, her calculator, and tucked them back into her bag, slowly, methodically, giving the silence room to punctuate and extend its length. The quiet stretched like a taut wire, vibrating with unspoken accusations, unanswered questions, and the collective breath of an audience that had just witnessed something raw and irreversible. Jasmine Crockett stood there, her posture straight, but not rigid, her eyes still fixed on Donald Trump, who remained frozen in his chair, a statue of denial carved from years of deflection and privilege. The moderator, a seasoned journalist named Alina Vargas, shifted uncomfortably at her podium, glancing at the clock that no longer seemed to matter. This wasn't a timed debate. It had evolved into a reckoning, a public dissection of a man's legacy under the harsh lights of truth. The silence lingered for what felt like an eternity, perhaps 2 full minutes, now broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning and the occasional shuffle of feet in the audience. Crockett didn't rush to fill it. She knew the power of pause, the way it forced reflection, the way it made the guilty squirm. Trump, for his part, stared straight ahead, his lips pursed, his fingers drumming faintly on the armrest, a telltale sign of the storm brewing inside. But no words came. No rebuttal, no tweet-worthy quip, no pivot to some unrelated grievance. Just silence, heavy and damning. Finally, Crockett spoke again, her voice softer now, almost reflective, as if she were addressing not just Trump, but the entire nation tuning in. You see, Mr. President, this isn't just about you anymore. It's about all of us. It's about the families in this room, the ones watching at home, the ones who have been carrying the weight of your decisions for years without even realizing how much it was costing them. She turned slightly toward the audience, her canvas shopping bag now slung over her shoulder like a badge of honor. Let's not stop here. We've covered the tariffs, the wall, the university, the contractors, the settlements. But patterns like this don't form in a vacuum. They build over time, layer by layer, decision by decision. And if we're going to understand the full picture, we need to dig deeper. Much deeper. The audience murmured in agreement, a low ripple of voices that built into scattered applause. Mrs. Rodriguez, the 73-year-old grandmother from earlier, nodded vigorously, her silver bun catching the stage lights. The veteran in the third row, still standing, lowered himself back into his seat, but kept his eyes locked on the stage, as if afraid to miss a single word. Outside, in the parking lot where thousands watched on giant screens, cheers erupted, muffled by the walls, but audible enough to send a shiver through the room. This was no longer a town hall, it was a movement, a collective exhale of frustration long suppressed. Crockett reached into her bag once more, pulling out a small, leather-bound notebook, her own, not a prop. She flipped it open to a marked page, her fingers tracing lines of handwritten notes. Let's talk about healthcare, she said, her tone shifting to one of measured intensity. Because while you've been touting economic wins and tough trade deals, millions of Americans have been paying for your policies in ways that go beyond their wallets. They pay with their health, their peace of mind, their very lives. Trump stirred at this, his face reddening slightly. Obamacare was a disaster, he muttered, finally breaking his silence, though his voice lacked its usual bluster. It was defensive, almost petulant. Crockett smiled faintly, not in amusement, but in acknowledgement. Yes. Obamacare. The Affordable Care Act. The law that, despite your repeated promises to repeal and replace it with something better, cheaper, and more beautiful, still stands, albeit weakened by your administration's actions. She held up the notebook. In 2017, during your first term, you signed a tax bill that eliminated the individual mandate, effectively gutting a key part of the ACA. You promised premiums would go down. Remember that? Tremendous savings, you said. But let's look at the numbers. She pulled out the calculator again, the tape whirring as she punched in figures. According to the Congressional Budget Office, a nonpartisan entity, mind you, your changes led to 13 million fewer Americans having health insurance by 2027. Premiums? They rose by an average of 10% in the individual market because healthier people opted out, leaving sicker, costlier patients in the pool. The tape printed out, and she tore it off, holding it aloft. That's not savings, Mr. President. That's a transfer of costs. Who pays? The uninsured who end up in emergency rooms, racking up bills they can't afford. The insured who see their premiums spike. Hospitals that absorb uncompensated care, passing those costs back to everyone else. Trump leaned forward, pointing a finger. We had the best healthcare plans coming, but the Democrats blocked it. Crockett shook her head. Blocked what exactly? You had control of Congress for 2 years. Where was the replacement plan? You had experts, advisors, think tanks at your disposal. But instead of a comprehensive reform, we got sabotage lawsuits to strike down the ACA, rules allowing junk insurance plans that cover next to nothing, cuts to outreach programs that helped people enroll. She set the notebook down and picked up a new prop from her bag, a stack of medical bills, redacted but real, obtained from constituents with permission. This is from a family in my district, a single mom with 2 kids. Her premium went up $200 a month after your changes. She skipped doctor visits to make ends meet. One of her kids ended up in the ER with untreated asthma. Cost? $5,000. Who paid? She did, through debt that nearly bankrupted her. The audience gasped audibly. A woman in the front row, holding a sign that read "Healthcare is a right," wiped away a tear. Crockett continued, her voice gaining strength. And let's not forget the pandemic. Your handling of COVID-19. You downplayed it, called it a hoax, promised it would disappear like a miracle. Meanwhile, supply chains for PPE collapsed under your tariffs. Yes, those same tariffs that hit medical equipment from China. Hospitals paid 20-30% more for masks and ventilators. Who absorbed that? Taxpayers, through emergency funding bills that ballooned the deficit. Trump scoffed. We did Operation Warp Speed. Vaccines in record time. True, Crockett conceded. Credit where it's due. But even there, the pattern holds. You touted the vaccines, then undermined them with mixed messages, leading to vaccine hesitancy that prolonged the pandemic. Over 1 million Americans dead, many preventable. Families paid with grief, lost wages, orphaned children. You left office, wrote a book, played golf. No personal cost. She paused, letting the weight settle. Healthcare isn't abstract policy. It's life and death. And under your watch, too many paid the ultimate price while you avoided accountability. The moderator interjected gently. Congresswoman, we're approaching the next segment. Do you have more? Crockett nodded. Oh, I do. Let's move to the environment. Because your policies there have long-term costs that our children will pay for decades. She pulled out a glossy report from the EPA, ironically, 1 weekend under Trump's first term. You rolled back over 100 environmental regulations. Clean power plan? Gutted. Methane emissions rules? Relaxed. Vehicle efficiency standards? Lowered. You promised jobs in coal and oil, but let's check the facts. Using her calculator again, she crunched numbers. Coal jobs? They continued to decline, from 50,000 in 2017 to under 40,000 by 2020, despite your promises. Meanwhile, renewable energy jobs grew by millions: solar, wind, batteries. But your tariffs on solar panels from China? They added 10-15% to costs, slowing deployment. Who pays? Consumers through higher energy bills, and future generations through climate change: wildfires in California, hurricanes in Florida, floods in the Midwest. Trump interrupted. Climate change is a hoax. China doesn't pay for it. Crockett's eyes flashed. China again. But here's the truth. Your withdrawal from the Paris Agreement isolated America, while China invested trillions in green tech. Now they're leading in electric vehicles and batteries. Your policies? They cost us leadership and jobs. And the health costs: air pollution from relaxed rules led to thousands of premature deaths, per studies from Harvard and the EPA. Families pay with asthma treatments, hospital visits, lost workdays. She held up a photo of a child using an inhaler, sourced from public health campaigns. This could be any kid in Phoenix, breathing smog from deregulated factories. You promised America first, but it's American lungs paying first. The audience applause swelled again, louder this time. The veteran stood once more, clapping steadily. Outside, chants of truth echoed faintly. Crockett pressed on. Now education. Beyond your university scam, your broader policies. You cut funding for public schools, pushed vouchers that drain resources from needy districts. In your budget proposals, slashes to Pell Grants, student aid. Who pays? Low-income students who can't afford college, perpetuating inequality. She flipped through her notebook. And student loans. You slowed forgiveness programs, making it harder for public servants, teachers, nurses to get relief. Billions in debt hanging over young people. Your family? Ivanka and Jared got PPP loans forgiven. Regular folks? They pay interest for life. Trump mumbled something about radical left indoctrination, but Crockett waved it off. This isn't ideology. It's math. Your tax cuts added $2 trillion to the deficit. To offset cuts to education, housing, food stamps. SNAP benefits reduced families like Mrs. Rodriguez pay with hunger. She turned to foreign policy. Your America first meant alienating allies. Tariffs on EU steel? Retaliation hit U.S. farmers. Who paid? Soybean exporters in Iowa, losing markets to Brazil. Your summits with Kim Jong-un? Photo ops, no denuclearization. North Korea stronger now. Taxpayers paid for the trips, the pomp. On and on she went, segment after segment, weaving in more examples, the mishandling of Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, paper towels tossed like insults, while people died without power, the family separation policy at the border, thousands of kids in cages, psychological trauma they'll pay for forever, the January 6th insurrection, you incited a mob, then watched from safety. Officers paid with their lives, democracy with scars. Each point backed by documents, quotes, numbers. The calculator tape grew into a scroll. Props piled up, a Puerto Rican flag, a child's drawing from a detention center, a farmer's hat from Iowa. Hours passed, the town hall extended beyond schedule, networks staying live. Audience members shared stories, a teacher on loan debt, a farmer on lost exports, a veteran on VA cuts. Trump's responses dwindled to grunts, deflections. The pattern crystallized, promises unkept, costs shifted, accountability evaded. Finally, as Don hinted outside, Crockett concluded, America, you've seen the evidence. The choice is yours. Will you keep paying, or demand better? The applause thundered, a catharsis. Trump left the stage silently, the receipts still coiled on the table, a symbol of truths unpaid. She gathered her papers, her receipts, her evidence, her calculator, and tucked them back into her bag, slowly, methodically, giving the silence room to punctuate and extend its length. The auditorium in Phoenix held its breath longer than anyone expected. 3 minutes, 4, the kind of hush that settles after a storm has passed, but the air still crackles with electricity. Cameras zoomed in on Trump's face, the tightened jaw, the eyes darting to the exit, the hands clenched, so firmly that the audience could almost hear the leather of the armrests creak. Moderator Elena Vargas cleared her throat twice, but no one moved to fill the void. This was the moment the nation had been waiting for, broadcast live on every major network, streamed on every platform, watched by tens of millions who had paused their dinners, their commutes, their bedtime routines to witness history unfolding in real time. Jasmine Crockett finally broke the silence, but not with triumph, with resolve. America, she said, addressing the cameras directly, her voice steady and warm, like a teacher speaking to a classroom that had just grasped a difficult truth, this isn't the end. This is the beginning. We've laid out the pattern tonight. Promises that someone else will pay, bills that always land on your doorstep. But patterns can be broken, and they start being broken when people like you, all of you, decide you've had enough. She turned back to the audience, scanning the rows where hands were still raised from her earlier question about personal accountability. The veteran in the third row had tears streaming down his cheeks now, unashamed. Mrs. Rodriguez clutched her purse tightly, nodding as if Crockett were speaking only to her. A young mother in the balcony held her toddler closer, the child's pink Velcro shoes, the very ones Crockett had held up earlier, dangling over the railing like a symbol. Let's keep going, Crockett continued, pulling out a fresh folder from her bag. This one was labeled Immigration and the Human Cost. The applause that followed was immediate, thunderous, a release of pent-up energy that shook the rafters. Outside, the parking lot crowd roared in unison, their voices carrying through the open doors on the warm desert night air. She began with family separation. You remember 2018, don't you? The zero-tolerance policy. Thousands of children ripped from their parents at the border. You promised it would deter illegal crossings. But crossings didn't stop, they surged. And who paid? Those kids. Trauma that lasts a lifetime. Therapist bills, nightmares, trust shattered before they even understood what a border was. She held up a laminated report from the American Academy of Pediatrics. Long-term mental health costs, anxiety, depression, PTSD. Studies show these children are twice as likely to face those issues into adulthood. And the taxpayers? We paid for the facilities, the courts, the reunifications that still aren't complete. Over $80 million in settlements alone for the harm caused. Trump shifted, muttering something inaudible about catch and release. Crockett didn't let him finish. No, sir. This wasn't catch and release. This was catch and traumatize. And when courts ordered reunifications? Your administration dragged its feet. Families still separated today. That's not tough. That's cruel. And the pattern? You promised Mexico would pay for security. They didn't. We did. With our money, our reputation, our humanity. The audience erupted again. A man in a construction hard hat stood up, shouting, My wife works with migrant kids in schools, they're scarred. Crockett nodded at him. Thank you for saying that. Because this isn't abstract. It's classrooms in Arizona, Texas, California. Kids who flinch at loud voices because they remember being taken away. She moved seamlessly to mass deportations in 2025. Now, in your second term, you've promised the largest deportation operation in history. ICE raids in masks, ironic, isn't it? Hiding faces while tearing apart communities. She pulled out photos. Families loading vans in the pre-dawn hours, children crying, businesses shuttered because workers vanished overnight. Economists, your own appointees included, warn this will shrink GDP by 2-4%. Who pays? Farmers with rotting crops. Construction sites delayed. Restaurants closing. The Tax Foundation again. Nonpartisan estimates $1 trillion in lost economic output over a decade. That's money not circulating in Phoenix grocery stores, not paying Arizona taxes, not funding schools. Trump tried again. They're criminals. Drugs. Fentanyl. Crockett held up a DEA report. Most fentanyl comes through legal ports of entry, carried by U.S. citizens, not migrants seeking asylum. And deporting long-term residents? People who have paid taxes for decades, raised American kids? That's not safety, that's disruption. Mixed status families torn apart. U.S.-born children left behind or forced into shadows. Who pays emotionally? Those kids. Who pays economically? Communities losing workers, consumers, neighbors. She paused, letting a video clip play on the massive screens behind her. Testimony from a raided workplace in Texas, workers in tears, bosses pleading for mercy. The auditorium fell silent again, the weight of real lives pressing down. Next, women's rights and reproductive care. Crockett's voice grew fiercer. After Roe fell, thanks to justices you appointed, women in red states lost access. You promised states' rights, but what about women's rights? Bans with no exceptions for rape, incest, health. Doctors fleeing states, maternity wards closing. She displayed a map, red states with closures highlighted. Arizona almost went there, voters saved it with Proposition 139, but the fight continues. Who pays? Women driving hundreds of miles for care. Families bankrupted by medical complications. Maternal mortality up 62% in banned states. She held up a medical bill, $40,000 for an emergency procedure denied locally. This is from a constituent. She nearly died. You call it pro-life. I call it pro-control. And the pattern? You promise freedom, deliver restrictions. Someone else, women pay the price. The women in the audience stood as one, applause crashing like waves. Signs reading "My body, my choice" waved furiously. Crockett transitioned to guns. After every mass shooting, thoughts and prayers. But no action. You blocked assault weapon bans, expanded concealed carry. Who pays? Families at funerals. Kids in lockdowns. Parkland, Uvalde, Sandy Hook, parents still grieving because common sense reforms were called woke. She showed photos of victims, names scrolling. NRA donations to your campaigns? Millions. Cost to America? Thousands of lives yearly. The pattern. Promise safety, deliver access to weapons of war. Foreign policy followed, alliances strained. You pulled from NATO commitments, praised dictators. Tariffs on allies Canada, EU retaliation hitting U.S. exports. Farmers again, whiskey, Harley-Davidson, lobster. Billions lost. She crunched numbers on the calculator. $12 billion in farmer bailouts, last time taxpayer money propping up your trade wars. Then infrastructure. You promised the greatest infrastructure week never happened. Bridges crumbling, roads potholed. Who pays? Commuters in traffic, businesses delayed shipments. Social Security and Medicare. Your budget's proposed cuts. Paul Ryan's old plans revived. You say they're entitlements, but people paid into them their whole lives. Touch them? Seniors pay with poverty, skipped meds. Each segment built on the last, props accumulating, reports, photos, bills, letters from constituents. Audience members came to the mic during open segments, sharing stories: a farmer bankrupted by retaliation, a mother denied abortion care, a veteran waiting months for benefits. Trump's interjections grew weaker. Deflections about fake news, radical left. But Crockett countered each with facts, quotes, evidence. The calculator tape now trailed across the table like a banner of truth. As midnight approached, networks extended coverage. Ratings soared. Social media exploded. Hash receipts for Trump trending worldwide. Crockett's closing, hours in, voice hoarse but unbroken. Mr. President, you've built a career on making others pay. But tonight, America sees the bill. And we're not paying it anymore. She stepped off stage to a standing ovation that lasted 10 minutes. Trump exited quietly, the coiled Walmart receipt left behind, a relic of the night truth won. The aftermath rippled, polls shifted, editorials demanded accountability, viral clips educated millions. Crockett's town hall became legend, a turning point where fiction met fact and the people chose the latter. She gathered her papers, her receipts, her evidence, her calculator, and tucked them back into her bag, slowly, methodically, giving the silence room to punctuate and extend its length. The auditorium's air felt thicker now, charged with the kind of quiet that follows a thunderclap, everyone waiting to see if the storm had truly passed or if lightning would strike again. Donald Trump remained seated, his posture rigid, the stage lights casting sharp shadows across his face that accentuated every crease of frustration. Moderator Elena Vargas glanced at her notes, then at the producers offstage, who signaled frantically to extend the broadcast. Networks had already bumped late-night programming. This was must-see television, raw and unscripted, drawing record viewership as word spread across social media like wildfire. Jasmine Crockett didn't sit. She paced slowly, her heels echoing softly, buying time for the moment to sink in. Finally, she stopped center stage, facing Trump directly. "Mr. President," she said, her voice calm but resonant, carrying to the back rows and into millions of homes, "we've covered a lot tonight. Tariffs that hit American wallets. A wall paid for by taxpayers, not Mexico. An university that took savings from retirees and widows. Contractors stiffed out of millions. Settlements for lies and defamations. Healthcare sabotaged. Environment deregulated for short-term gains that cost long-term pain. Immigration policies that tear families apart while shrinking our economy. Women's rights rolled back. Guns unchecked. Infrastructure promised but undelivered. Social security threatened." She listed them like counts in an indictment, pausing after each for emphasis. The audience murmured affirmations, nods, quiet amens, a few scattered claps building into waves. "But there's more," Crockett continued, reaching into her bag for yet another folder, this one thicker, labeled Veterans and National Security. The crowd leaned forward. "Because if we're talking about who pays, let's talk about those who paid the ultimate price, the men and women in uniform who served under your command." Trump's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. "You promised to take care of our veterans," Crockett said, pulling out a VA report. "Better than anybody. But your budgets? Proposed cuts to VA funding multiple times. Privatization pushes that would shift care to for-profit entities, where wait times ballooned in pilot programs." She held up charts. "Veterans' suicide rates 22 a day under your watch, no significant drop despite promises. The PACT Act for burn pit victims? You initially opposed it, called it too expensive until political pressure forced a flip." The veteran in the third row stood again, his cap clutched in his hands. "My buddy from Iraq burn pits gave him cancer. Died waiting for approval that came too late." Crockett nodded solemnly. "Thank you for your service, sir. And for sharing that. Because, Mr. President, when you diverted military funds for that wall, $15 billion from Pentagon budgets, who paid? Troops without ready equipment. Families with delayed housing projects. Readiness reports showed gaps in training, maintenance." She crunched numbers on the calculator. Diverted funds could have covered 100,000 military housing units or upgraded 50 bases. Instead, rusting bollards in the desert. Trump muttered, "Strongest military ever." "Strongest?" Crockett countered. "You left office with alliances frayed, NATO partners doubting us after you threatened to pull out. Russia emboldened, invading Ukraine on your successor's watch, but after your Helsinki performance where you sided with Putin over our intelligence. China expanding in the South China Sea unchecked." She pulled out maps, satellite images of Chinese bases. Who pays now? Taiwan on edge. Allies rearming alone. American taxpayers footing higher defense bills because trust eroded. Next segment, racial justice and policing. You called for law and order while stoking division. Central Park 5 exonerated, yet you never apologized for calling for their execution. Charlottesville, very fine people on both sides. Who paid? Communities torn by hate crimes that spiked. Black families losing sons to police violence. No federal reform under your DOJ. She shared stories from constituents. George Floyd's name evoked gasps. Pattern, promise protection, deliver polarization. Others pay the price in fear, in lives. Economy beyond tariffs. You brag about stock markets, but pre-pandemic crash under your watch. Tax cuts $2 trillion mostly to corporations and wealthy. Deficits exploded. Who paid? Future generations with debt. Working class with stagnant wages despite booming claims. COVID response revisited deeper. Operation Warp Speed credit given. But downplaying masks, bleach injections suggested, rallies super spreaders. Over 1 million dead. Small businesses shuttered while your properties got PPP loans forgiven. Audience members shared. A nurse on lost colleagues. A business owner on bankruptcy. Housing crisis. Rents skyrocketed. No national strategy. Your HUD secretary? Ben Carson, who cut fair housing enforcement. Who pays? Families evicted, homeless vets, kids in unstable homes affecting education. Education deeper, Betsy DeVos vouchers draining public schools. Forgiveness program stalled for teachers, nurses. Student debt ballooned. Who pays? Graduates burdened, delaying homes, families. LGBTQ+ rights. Trans military ban thousands discharged or deterred. Who pays? Service members' careers cut short, units losing talent. Foreign aid cuts, Africa, Latin America slashed leading to migration surges you then demonized. Each topic layered evidence, reports, testimonies, photos, videos played on screens. Hours blurred broadcast extended into dawn. Viewers texted stories, networks aired them live. Trump's deflections weakened. Friday News, witch hunt. Crockett dismantled each with facts. As sun rose, Crockett's finale, Mr. President, the question stands. One time you paid personally for a mistake. Still waiting. Silence again. Trump rose abruptly, exiting to sparse claps from a few holdouts. Crockett addressed America. You've seen the receipts, not just Walmart's, but life's. The pattern is clear. Time to stop paying his bills. Standing ovation lasted eternally. Outside, crowds chanted her name. Media called it the reckoning of the decade. Polls shifted overnight. Viral moments educated, mobilized. In aftermath, investigations spurred, policies challenged. Crockett emerged stronger, voice for the unpaid. The coiled receipt remained on stage, a monument to truth unveiled.